Normally, especially when you teach students, you find out that everybody thinks the world was always the way it is today. But in reality, it has changed dramatically over the last even 10, 20,000 years, which from an evolutionary point of view is next to no time. And that's something that we see here on the video, where you see the continental drift or the continental shelf indicated in yellow and in green. And the areas in yellow that are shown in yellow right now, they're currently underwater. But 10,000 years ago, you could actually, or 20,000 years ago, you could actually walk from here, Singapore, to Borneo. You could walk from Borneo to Sumatra. You could walk from Sumatra to Java. So you can imagine the landmass was so much bigger that it was supporting a completely different fauna and flora. Larger animals had a much easier chance of finding enough habitat to survive. And as the water level started to go up, we see the whole continental shelf becoming little islands. And once the habitat is becoming smaller and smaller, a large number of species went extinct. Other species adapted to the new conditions. And today we have only a fraction of the land mass that we used to have 10, 20,000 years ago. Now these cycles between water levels going up and down happen multiple times over a relatively short period of time, and that has left a huge mark on the fauna and flora of Southeast Asia. The vast majority of species living in this area have not been described yet. We know very well what kind of mammals and what kind of bird species we have, although even bird species are still being described, both from Sunderland and from Wallacea. But the vast majority of species are really insects and arthropods. And I would say at least half of those species are not described. I would expect that eventually maybe 20, maybe 30% of all the species alive on the planet will be found in this area. Unfortunately, we may not ever find them because at the same time we're in an area of very rapid destruction of natural habitats. We have a lot of deforestation ongoing, we have a lot of loss in peat swamps, we have a lot of loss of habitats, and unfortunately we'll never find out what species were living there if the habitats are being destroyed before they have even been explored. So there's a deep trench between an area called Sunderland and an area called Wallacea. And that trench was so deep that even when the water levels were very low, there was no connection, no land connection. And that is a very important biogeographic line. We see major changes in the fauna and flora between the two sides of that line. So that is Wallacea on one side and Sunderland on the other side. And that's a discovery that was made by Wallace, who described this Wallace line in the 19th century. And Wallace was an explorer who lived in a British explorer who spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, many years, and he collected on either side of the Wallace line. And we have a lot of specimens from him that were ultimately sent then to Europe, where they were sold, so that Wallace was able to support his expeditions. And he was the one who discovered that there's a huge difference in fauna and flora on both sides of this particular line that is ultimately due to that deep trench. There are different groups that have, there are some groups for which this line is not very important. So if you are a bird that doesn't mind flying over water, that line is not significant. But if your biology is such that you cannot cross that line very easily, then you'll see big differences between one side of the line and the other side of the line. So it really depends on the group of organisms. So it tends to be more important for certain mammal groups and certain bird groups and for a lot of insect groups that are being drifted around by wind or that are capable of even drifting on water. Insects are the masters of finding solutions to different environments, and that's probably also the reason why there are so many different species. We know that more than 1 million species have already been described, but we expect there to be ultimately 5 to 10 million different types of insects. And insects usually have to find new solutions for different environments because different environments throw different problems at them. Plants, for example, are full of secondary compounds, chemical compounds that are very often very noxious, and insects have to find biochemical ways to detoxify the food that they're feeding on. And different insects feeding on different plants will have different biochemical solutions, and that's how we get so many different species of insects. Now, for every insect that is feeding on plants, there's going to be some predators that are feeding on the insects that are feeding on plants. Since these insects feeding on plants are different, the predators also have to be different, and that's how we get a huge number of different species across different groups. So we don't quite understand the relationship between biodiversity and the stability of an ecosystem, but there's some evidence that an ecosystem is more stable if it's more rich in species. We also know that some ecosystems will decline rather rapidly, even if you take out a few key species that are important for ecosystem functions. For mammals and birds, we tend to know which are the key species. Unfortunately, in insects, because we don't know them very well, we are quite ignorant about what species are particularly important to an environment. Humans have had a major impact on species diversity for as long as humans have been around. So we definitely know that a large number of the megafauna, a large number of the really large mammals and birds were partially killed off by humans, partially killed off by environmental change that was introduced by humans. Because we can usually tell when humans are coming into an environment, and then we oftentimes see the decline of the large animals and large mammals and large birds within a few hundreds or thousands of years of human arrival. The impact is sometimes via hunting, the impact is sometimes by environmental degradation, sometimes it's also by bringing in other species that are starting to change the environment dramatically. For example, bringing in rats has had a huge impact on a lot of species of mammals and birds on different islands. And oftentimes it's the rats that are more important in leading to a decline of a species than the human impact directly. We have here a display of very large reptiles. We have a water monitor here. We have a replica of a skeleton of a Komodo dragon. And you see the water monitor is actually quite large. Water monitors can grow to, I would say, about twice the size. And they are quite common on the Malay Peninsula, but also in Singapore. And they're a very important predator and scavenger in Singapore. Now, Singapore is a weird environment in the sense that a large number of the real predators, the big predators, the mammal predators, has gone extinct. So we don't have tigers, we do not have leopard anymore. And so now some of the reptiles are becoming our biggest predators. Water monitor is a fairly large potential predator, but we also have the python becoming the main and the largest predator on the island. Now, when this kind of thing happens, the size and the biology and also the morphology of a species can change, because now the big predators are gone and a new niche has opened up that can be taken over by reptiles. Something along those lines probably also happened to the Komodo, because on Komodo there is no longer any large mammal predators, and the Komodo dragon has become the largest predator on the island. Well, evolution can generate change very rapidly. And size change is particularly easy to generate. And as scientists, as evolutionary biologists, we know that. Because when we do lab experiments and we select for larger size, we get a response within very few generations. If we select for smaller size, we also get a response within very few generations. So we actually understand this quite well, and it's very easy to replicate in the lab. The only problem is with doing this kind of experiment on reptiles is that the generation time tends to be very long, and that's why most experiments are based on insects. But the principle is very similar, and we have done this for many insect species. There's no reason to suspect that this would not work for vertebrates either. So it's more a matter of convenience in a lab, that you want to use something that has a very short generation time. Well, we know for Komodo dragons that they have suffered tremendously from the removal of their favorite prey, which is deer. And that is mostly due to the fact that humans were starting to hunt deer. Because they were hunting deer, the amount of prey available was coming down rather rapidly, and that has had a major negative impact on the diversity, on the number of Komodo dragons on the island. Something very similar is actually happening to the tiger. In India, the tiger numbers are declining very quickly, partially because of human predation on deer. Deer are also very important tiger food. The moment you want to preserve the tiger population, you oftentimes have to start by preserving or making sure that the deer population is healthy, because without deer, you're not going to get large numbers of tigers in an environment. So oftentimes we have to look at the whole ecosystem in order to preserve a particular species. Size varies very widely, but it also changes very rapidly. So we're here looking at a number of different crab species, and we see they range from very tiny. We see a little glass container there, where in the middle there's a fully mature crab, to very, very large crabs. We see the largest crab here, which is a Japanese spider crab. But we also see the largest land-dwelling crab over there, which is a coconut crab. So the same design can be used for very different purposes. Some of these crabs are living in water. The coconut crab is actually a land-dwelling crab. And all of that can be evolving rather rapidly if the environment is allowing for new adaptations through new kinds of resources, or to allow the crab to explore different kinds of resources. So when we look at this particular coconut crab, it is actually the largest living arthropod on land. It's not an insect, it's actually a crab that is the largest arthropod living on land.